to the people joining through the live stream. We're very excited to be here, and I hope that we can pull the slides on the screen in just a moment. I see they're doing the magic behind the scenes. So, my name is Marta Schlönvogt. I'm with the Agora Energy Transition think tank. It's a German think tank situated in Berlin. But more importantly, I'm also with the Enertrax Alumni Network. And I see we don't have the slides on yet, so let me just continue with my introduction. I'm with the Enertrax Alumni Network. Our panel is comprised of alumni from our network, and we're here today to talk about enabling just transition, policy, technology, and community engagement. We're very excited at being here today, at being able to open this day on just transition and sustainable economies, a very, very relevant topic. And we have a group of panelists here today that will be showcasing their work on just transition. So to set the scene, a little bit of an info on who the Enertrax training program is, from which the Enertrax Alumni Network derives. The Enertrax training program was developed together from Agora and the Renewables Academy, RENAC in short, and we launched in 2018. We aim to share sector-specific knowledge with independent thought leaders around the world that work in the area of energy transition and aim to transform energy systems in low and middle-income countries. We are funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action through the International Climate Initiative. And as mentioned, since our conception in 2018, so we're currently in our 5th year, kind of rounding up our 5th year now, we have empowered independent thought leaders in 3 training pathways that we offer. There is the 2-week study tour that focuses on decarbonization and includes the development of a decarbonization roadmap. We have a 6-week fellowship that focuses on all things energy transition, especially on stakeholder messaging and policy. And we have 4 online modules that, as the name implies, take place in a virtual setting. And we offer these in both English and Spanish language. And so right now, we're actually celebrating the very first in-person alumni meeting that we've brought together just in time for COP27 here in Egypt. And I think for most of us, the highlight of our trip is truly being here, being able to speak, being able to have the alumni present their work and their organizations and what they do. And so I want to a little bit set the guidelines here for the Enertrax Alumni Network. It derives, as mentioned, from the Enertrax training program. Who it is, it's really a group of over 100 currently still growing group of energy professionals who are all graduates of either our fellowship or our study tour, or in some cases both. They all work primarily for independent think tanks, for NGOs and civil society, but overall, they all share the same vision, the vision of transforming energy systems to becoming more sustainable. Our alumni, and you can see this also, we have currently 63 nationalities. We are still growing. We are currently implementing a fellowship as we speak. So my colleagues have set up a live stream with the fellows back in Berlin. And we will also be hosting a study tour later this year. And so with the 36 nationalities, it really ranges from Bosnia to the Philippines, Sri Lanka to China, from Colombia to Argentina. And we have a lot of nationalities also represented in our alumni network panel. The expertise from our alumni is a range of energy and climate issues like law, policy, but also engineering backgrounds, technical knowledge, finance, economics, but of course also social issues like coal phase out and just transition, which is the topic of the panel discussion today. And so while we were preparing this event, we thought, well, maybe one thing to set the scene and not only show who the alumni are that will be speaking here today, but also who the organizations are that the alumni represent, we thought, let's show a little bit of a clip. What does Just Transition mean to you? You meaning the alumni of the ENERTRACS Alumni Network. And so this is the verbal cue for the technical support to show a small video that we've prepared showcasing what Just Transition means to the ENERTRACS Alumni Network. So we'll just let them set this up for a little minute. So I see a little bit of a, okay, I think we're getting there.
No one behind.
A just energy transition to me means that nobody is left behind.
Leaving no one behind.
Leaving no one behind.
Taking proactive and deliberate measures to remedy past injustice.
Placing Africans at the center of it all. Creating opportunities for skills transfer.
While at the same time considering the families and the people and the livelihoods that will be affected during this transition.
Address the marginalized communities by socially uplifting them and addressing the issues of energy poverty.
This would require ensuring that all voices are heard in the decision-making process and also the equitable distribution of benefits and burdens among the different people and communities.
So that as a little snippet of the alumni network and the opinions represented in the network, we will now move to the panel discussion. Once we have this slide up with the panelists of today, you can also have a look at who they are, where they're coming from. I will hand over now to the moderator, very excited to have Ms. Aisha Saransari moderate today's panel. Aisha works for Shura Energy Transition Institute, and I will hand over to her now.
Thank you very much, Marta, for this really nice presentation and showing us, introducing our precious ENERTRACS program. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us this early morning in our session, Enabling Just Transition, Policy, Technology, and Community Engagements, the slide of which is coming right now. So today we are going to be discussing just transition from an energy transition perspective as the experts of mainly energy transition here. So we are very happy to be here, especially in the Just Transition Day. We think it's a really meaningful coming together. And I would also like to thank ENERTRACS for organizing this panel, inviting all of us to take part in COP27, as well as many activities through the COP. So I am Aisha Saransari, as Marta mentioned, introduced from Shura Energy Transition Center. Shura is from Istanbul, Turkey, so am I. I'm very honored to be moderating this morning's session today. Just to introduce Shura briefly, Shura is the first and leading think tank working on energy transition in Turkey. We contribute to the decarbonization of energy sectors in Turkey via an innovative energy transition platform. We aim to cater to the need for a sustainable and broadly recognized platform for discussions mainly on policy, technological, and economic aspects of Turkey's energy sector, Turkey's energy transition. And we aim to support the debate on transition through this transition to low carbon Turkey's energy system by fact-based analysis, best available data, and as mentioned, through being a dialogue platform for different stakeholders. Just transition and socioeconomic impacts of energy transition is one of the main areas that we truly focus on. And today I too would like to kind of use the advantage of being a moderator at this panel and also bring Shura's perspective about Turkey on the table in addition to our precious panelists. But first, I would like to introduce you our panelists of today's session. Here now we are together with Daniela Gomel from Argentina. Daniela, she is a specialist at the Public Policy and Governance Division at the Fundación Vida Silvestre Argentina. Our second panelist is Kajol from India. Kajol is the senior manager with the energy program at World Resources Institute, India. Our third panelist, Mahmoud Abu Naga from Egypt, living in the United States of America, is a Solutions Fellow at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. And our fourth panelist, Marina Azevedo from Brazil, is a technical consultant at E+ Energy Transition Institute based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So before giving the panel to our panelists, I would like to take a minute to inform our audience, that we will have a short span of time at the end of our panel for question and answers. And I would like to encourage you to take notes for any questions, comments, reviews, reactions you might have during our panel. So in the beginning of our panel, we watched our video as we, Enertrax graduate prepares, that we collectively provided some definitions for just transition. Keeping in mind that different countries have different needs, challenges, and thus different framings for this particular topic, I would like to raise my first question to our panelists. What does just transition mean for you and or your country? How do you and or your organization think the advantages of just transition is and will be in your country? And in which way is you and your organization are involved in just transition efforts? So Daniela, maybe we can start with you in Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you for the audience. I'm very happy to be in this panel, sharing a lot of reflections with my colleagues from other countries. So in relation to your question, Aisha, in Argentina... More closer? Okay, thanks. So in Argentina, the energy just transition is being approached in a fair way. Just last week, the government released the action plan for adaptation and mitigation, which is a mandate of a climate change law we have. And there it's defined as mainly covering the labor challenges that energy, transition in general has to meet our NDCs. So the definition is basically focused on labor challenges. And of course, from our institution, we also think that there are other challenges associated to energy just transition and transition in general, sustainability transition in general, related to health, related to integration of diversities, which are also contemplated within the national action plan that I just mentioned. However, it's not that they are not directly linked to the concept of just transition, right? A thing to mention is that Argentina presented last year an NDC which stabilizes its emissions for 2030. And that is actually within the emissions gap report limits, which is fine, and we agree on that. We think it's a reasonable target. And the country committed to carbon neutrality for 2050. However, we expected to find an action plan with specific measures on how each sector is going to contribute to the NDC goal, and this is not something we are finding. There are only big measures that incorporate renewable energies, evaluating the integration of a wider carbon tax, releasing energy efficiency measures for the different sectors. It also comprises transport and other sectors such as agriculture and land use. But as I was mentioning, each measure doesn't have specific policies. They don't have any specific contribution to the NDC, neither costs. The plan only mentions overall cost of how this plan must be funded. It's around $185 million, but it's not spread among each measure, so it's a bit hard to know. Also, a big concern for us is that the plan includes gas as a transition source. However, it's not mentioned how it's going to be shut down, neither oil for 2050 or neither 2030. So we are following up on that, and we are contributing to accomplishing those measures. But maybe I can expand a bit later on our specific work as an NGO, and how we are involving in pursuing just transition, whether in energy sector, but also we work on the agricultural sector. But this panel is about energy, just wanted to mention that. And how is that we partner with other institutions for working towards energy transition. So this is for me right now, and I'm open to questions and expand on any points you'd like to.
Thank you very much, Daniela. So it's very interesting, the perspective that you brought from Argentina. So it's great news that you have an action plan for adaptation mitigation. It's newly explained. And it's interesting to hear that just transition is actually defined, and it's defined as labor challenges, right? And you also mentioned some challenges around like establishment of decent targets at different areas, and no integral policies for also other areas of like energy transition. We can summarize like that. Okay, thank you very much. So Kajol, like if you move to India, like what will be your perspectives about like how just transition is taken in your country and region?
Yeah. Thanks, Aisha, for this question. And I'm really thankful to the PCCB network and Agora to putting this all together. I think it's a very important question because, transition has been happening and we have not looked at how this transition can be more just. So, India has its own large targets for decarbonization. We have our INDCs in place, and we have pledged to increase our non-fossil fuel consumption in the overall RE mix by 2030. And it's already underway, I would say, in India. Like right now, the 24% of the renewable energy generation is there in the electricity mix as a total installed capacity. And the transition has already been underway, but the biggest challenge comes with how India can look at from the point of it's being more just, because a lot of local communities and local people are involved in the overall transition. And when we just look at the mass socio-economic impact that this will bring, it will be a bigger challenge for India, and that is something which we don't have a very clear framework and definition, because when we look at the just transition, because we don't know how do we really define it to be just, because it looks at different components of whether it's going to be just the livelihood, or we need to be like looking at the gender perspective, or looking at from the upskilling point of view. And there is a major challenge because a lot of our coal-based or a fossil fuel-based generation or the mining is happening at the eastern region of India, while most of the transition and the renewable energy installation is happening in the western and the southern parts. So this will actually leads to a lot of migration that will eventually going to happen, and that requires a very clear pathway and a framework which will determine how the overall pathway for the just transition will be. And the another challenge which I see, and how India can look at from the point of view, is the gender has not been the center stage for most of these discussion. And I work very closely with the industries and the supply chain and the manufacturing segment, and the gender component, the women component, has always been missing from the industries. When we look at the industries generation, so it's kind of very important to bring in those aspects at the same time, and that's where WRI is working more closely with the industries and the manufacturing segment. We're trying to understand how does the pathway for the just transition will look like, and not to just look at the just, but to have it a more fair and equitable transition. Going beyond just saying that this is only going to be impacting one kind of a community or the mass economic disruption that will happen, but also to include the other sort of people as well, because we need to work more closely with the regulators. We need to do the capacity building and create that ecosystem. It's not just the reskilling and upskilling of the laborers, but it's also the creating the ecosystem with the industries, with the regulators, so they become more conducive of the whole fact that this is going to be the just transition, more fair and equitable. Until now, there has always been a little, kind of a setback for the women's in the manufacturing segment and in the industries to be part of it, because they always thought that this is going to be more laborers. But with the movement towards the cleaner fuel, this can actually lead to the kind of the involvement that they can come up and adopt some of these clean jobs. So the women in the industries can also start to participate in as we move towards the just transition. So I think it has a multiple advantages, because your one question was there, like, how does this bring more advantages? So this will bring, I feel, this is like a very personal opinion, but yeah, I feel that this will bring more involvement of the economic development, women involvement at the same time, creating more jobs, cleaner jobs, not just having, the jobs which is there in the fossil fuel, but cleaner jobs, better livelihoods, and at the same time also looking at the health condition, because, we are a huge country and we have a lot of populations around, and some of them are living in the polluted areas. So this can actually help in reducing the sort of like a pollution and better health facilities for the women as well, and for the other people who are below the poverty line. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Kajol. Like, you highlighted two really important points, like the migration of local people through just transition is definitely an issue in many countries, and as you mentioned, like especially in India. And definitely there needs to be like many challenges, like many solutions to be developed in this manner. And also it's really important, like what you mentioned, like actually like the socioeconomic impacts of like a fair and equitable transition opens up the opportunity for being inclusive of like different technologies, industries, and gender as well. Like the gender issue is also something we talk a lot like in Turkey as well, like the how the clean technologies are more inclusive in this manner. Thank you very much. So Mahmoud, if we turn to you, like you are representing two countries actually. You are from Egypt and you are living in the United States. Like, could you be kind and provide maybe two approaches from these two countries about just transition?
Thank you, Aisha, and good morning, everyone. As you mentioned, since like I'm Egyptian, living and working in the United States, I will try to answer that questions by referring to these two different contexts. So in the United States,
Just Transition has become central, especially in the last few years after the recently enacted legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law included clear provision that allocated funds for disadvantaged communities or energy communities. And probably for the first time, we have seen increased funding earmarked for these communities in particular to allow the workforce transition to a clean future. That is really important. Another good example of that is the Justice 40 initiative, which basically allocates 40% of the benefits of the federal investments to disadvantaged communities. This comes after many years where the funds available for these kind of projects was not enough. So it's great to see that finally coming to fruition. However, there is still a lot of space to enhance how we approach these local communities. There is a need to update how we engage with the community when it comes to energy projects or heavy emission projects. It's important that they have access to the tools that allow them to make informed decisions and be included in the process. So that's on the domestic front, briefly in the United States. On the global front, the picture is much different because the United States is actually very behind when it comes to mobilizing funds to developing economies to mitigate or adapt to climate impacts. A report that was actually released earlier this week talked about how the United States only contributed 19% of its fair share of the $100 billion commitment that was made back in 2009. So it's not just we are late, we are also far off track. So this is briefly the picture for the United States. If we move to Egypt, since we're here, Just Transition has been mainly referred to when we talk about when the government tries to attract green investments from developed economies. For sure, considering the country's small share of the global emissions and other socioeconomic challenges, the countries feel that this is an essential step, and that's why we saw the national determined contribution, like the NDCs in Egypt, are conditional to receive of that kind of support. And that has been the narrative, like when the government or when the country speaks about Just Transition on the global front. On the domestic front, Just Transition has been talked about mainly when the conversation is about sustainable economic development. So it's about an approach to basically achieve economic development across the economy using all of the above approach. All of the above approach, that means we're talking about projects in oil, gas, renewables, emerging technologies like hydrogen, basically anything that can create local workforce, create job opportunities. This has been the message around Just Transition domestically. But when it comes to community engagement on energy policy reform or climate action plans, there has been actually serious shortcomings in the Egyptian context. Just to give you an idea about that, like the updated NDC that Egypt submitted in June to the UNFCCC, community engagement was mentioned twice in the document, only twice. Just Transition was mentioned only once. Climate justice, do you have an assessment how many times it was mentioned? None. It was never mentioned in the report. So this is concerning because we need more engagement from the local communities that basically their livelihoods will be affected by these policies or by these climate action plans. And let me wrap up by quoting a recognized advocate for climate action and the former president of my own organization, Bob Chesebi, and apply this specifically for the Egyptian context. There is no lasting climate solution without climate justice, and no climate justice without social justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud. These are definitely two very important perspectives on Just Transition, climate change, and climate justice as well. It's very interesting to see the where the different countries are at different frontiers. Like U.S. is kind of talking about Just Transition by laws and regulations, but as you're saying, in the global front, it's very behind in terms of especially like mobilizing funds, we can say. And in Egypt, like as you mentioned, like in the NDC, there is climate action, but in the domestic front, we don't see much talk. And Just Transition is, as far as I understand, is taken as a sustainable economic development approach with use all of the above, like what is possible approach. And communities are not present in the discussion, as far as I understand. Thank you very much for this, like very brief, nice presentation. And Marie, now maybe we can move to you and Brazil now. Like how is Just Transition happening in your country? How do you see the things going?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Aisha, for your question. Yeah, talking about a little bit about the perspective of Brazil, the discussion has been mainly about so far about energy affordability and employment. So we have to remember, like, Brazil has many layers, right? So we are talking about a country that has a high social vulnerability. We have like, this is data from 2014. Actually, we had like 13% of the country living in poverty conditions and 4% living in extreme poverty conditions. The situation, like this data is outdated, so the situation is even worse now. And 4% may perhaps not seem like such a big rate, but we are talking about a country with over 200 million people. So we are talking about over 8 million people living in very harsh conditions. Like the second thing is Brazil is also a very big country, right? We have a continental scale size, and so that comes with like a huge diversity in terms of what resources we have, what the different regions can provide, and but also regarding population and the many different cultural aspects of it. So talking about a just transition is fundamental there because it's a matter of guaranteeing the rights of people. And so just to set the scenario, I'd like to bring one example. So for example, climate change is currently affecting our water availability. And Brazil is a country mainly so 65% of our power generation comes from hydro. So when we talk about water availability, we are dealing directly with energy security problem, and also water is not only used for electricity generation, right? We have many other uses, so this is also being impacted. And right now, the main solution the country has been is finding is to increase fossil fuel thermal power plants. And that brings not only an environmental problem, but also a social problem, considering where these thermal plants are more concentrated and increasing like the air pollution in urban city centers. But also regarding what I said before, when we talk about like one of the main issues of the country is energy affordability. We have actually one of the most expensive tariffs per income per capita of the world. So when we increase these thermal power plants, we are actually increasing electricity prices. So when we plan our energy transition, we have to think about all these aspects, and we can actually see, like, actually if we would increase renewable generation, the tendency would be that the tariffs would drop, and energy would not only make it, would not only become more accessible, but also contribute to social aspects in a broader way, like in the sense that electricity is an important input for all the economies. So it's fundamental that we have real strategic planning that considers the energy transition with all its social aspects, and not only regarding employment and energy affordability, which is how it's been done now.
Thank you very much, Marina. Like your presentation embraces issue, I think it really brings a new perspective of energy transition. Like we have been, like I think it's a term that's really like have many commonalities between different regions and also very important differences as well. Like we have been talking about labor, transition of labor a lot, and also like how just transition is defined in different settings by NDCs or taking under the umbrella of sustainability, and maybe included coal as well or other resources as well. And Brazil's example brings the approach, the perception of end users in a very important way. Like there is labor is very important as far as we understand in Brazil, and also energy affordability, end user pricing, and energy access are of particular importance, particularly for Brazil. So I would also like to steal the stage a bit and also bring the case of Turkey a little bit, like once we are here, many countries, and maybe talk about some bits of Shura's results a little bit on socioeconomic impacts of just transition. Like when we looked at Shura analyzes like through different scenarios, we saw that because labor is an important topic, labor transition is an important topic of Turkey, and in general, when we are talking about energy transition with different stakeholders, we always have this question of, okay, when we get out of hydrocarbons, when we phase them out, and then we are going to increase the unemployment. And this was one of the main topics that we looked upon when we were looking at the socioeconomic impacts. And actually we saw that in Turkey's case, we can increase net employment by 43,000 by 2030, including phasing out of fossil fuels, which means like almost 600,000 of like new job creation in Turkey, 40% of which are in manufacturing and almost 60% in construction. And these numbers can increase by energy efficiency, distributed energy systems, digitalization, and storage technologies. Not to mention the decrease of carbon dioxide emissions and carbon intensity in overall economy in Turkey, which all translate into better jobs, with higher skills, higher income levels, and improved balance of trade, higher GDP, and better air quality. And in total, like when we looked at the economic benefits of transition, like what we can count, which are not including what we cannot count in the overall like socioeconomic welfare, we saw that like the economic benefits only are 3 times more than energy transition's costs. So I would like to take this moment to move to our second question actually. Like we defined just transition in our like respective countries, and we talked about the advantages. Now I would like to ask you how you and your organization see the challenges against just transition in your country, and how do you see the way forward? Like how can these challenges be overcome, and what role can international cooperation play in this way forward? Let's say, Mahmoud, maybe this time we can start with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think the 3 main challenges for just transition is basically 1, the different level of historical responsibility and the mismatch between this historical responsibility and the level of climate action. I think the fact that the G20 countries are responsible for 80% of the global emission is just shocking, and it makes our conversation today, or all the conversation that we have been having about climate action from developing countries, almost irrelevant, because guess what? If we do everything we can, that's only 20% of the global emission. So we can't get there without major economies also doing their part and matching their historical responsibility. The second one is that the current level of climate adaptation finance is not on track to provide decent level of preparedness for vulnerable countries. We have seen that this year clearly in Pakistan. We have seen extreme droughts in different regions in Africa, and we are not on track to honor this commitment, neither the 100 billion commitment that was there in 2009 or even the 40 billion commitment that was last year in Glasgow. We are off track on both. The third one is also the limited transfer of technology and patents when it comes to low carbon technologies. Like over the last decade, over 70% of the patent transfer of low carbon technologies happened within countries in the global north. So that means countries in the global south will always be on the receiving end just operating the technology, but not actually owning or developing these technologies. And if I can move to like the other side of this and the way forward, it's basically corresponded to the three main points. One, we need to increase the level of climate action, especially in major economies and hard to abate sectors. It's time to address that. It's not a problem for the future anymore. Second, we need to facilitate the transfer of funds, especially adaptation funds, so that developing countries are not in a position to basically have a compromise. It's either climate action or economic development. This is not a fair compromise, and they shouldn't have to decide that. The third one is that developing countries, from their side, they need to adapt to some adopt some new measures, regulatory measures, transparency measures, to make sure that the actions or the money that's transferred to them is being used to achieve actual emission reductions and increase the economic output. Also, they need to focus a lot on local capacity building and community engagement, so we make sure that these communities, that their livelihoods will be affected by different energy or adaptation projects, are at the table when these decisions are made. It's not fair that people are absent and basically these decisions trickle down on them and they are always on the receiving end. They have to be part of the process. And the last thing is, we should allow more patent transfer, regulatory reform on the developing country side to grant royalties or provide some degree of assurance for these patent developers to transfer their technologies and their patents to developing countries, get realities for that, get license for that. That will help have some manufacturing, long-term manufacturing jobs in developing countries instead of the short-term construction or maintenance jobs. So people don't only operate the technologies, but they also contribute to the development of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud. As we have like little time left, maybe I missed the like wrap up of like each of the presenters. So Marina, maybe we can continue with you.
Yeah, sure. So talking about the challenges, I think we start with a very basic one, which is people don't really understand. Like when I say people, I'm not talking about the experts, people who work for the energy sector or anyway. So these groups are starting to talk about, but general society, they don't understand what energy transition is. They don't relate to that, and we have a situation where actually people. They are still struggling to survive, so they don't see the problems of the future as more important than the problems of the present. And they understand that energy has an important role in their lives, and they understand certain things like flooding is bad, and if it doesn't rain, my electricity bills will increase. But they don't understand how this is related to their daily lives, and so the discussion in Brazil is still very concentrated in few topics, as I mentioned before. So energy affordability, I believe, is the main one, but also it's concentrated on solving immediate problems and not associating how, if we could actually figure out a plan that considers the future, this can also have an impact now. And I would like to bring two examples actually from very recent. We just actually had presidential elections in Brazil. So like two examples that are related to that is like in the previous year, in 2021, we had a very serious electricity crisis due to water unavailability. So because the government was really afraid of the risk of blackouts during the election year, which would bring a very negative image, of course. So one of the solutions they found was to hire a lot of emergency fossil fuel thermal power plants. Because this was in an emergency state and very last minute, and they had to rush to be built. This was like even more expensive than it it already is. And so first of all, they couldn't get built in time. So that was one problem. And the second problem is because of these contracts, like the amount of money turning into dollars would be around $7 to $8 billion in addition. That later it has to be, who is going to pay for that? So consumers are paying for that. So this is an example like how, okay, we have to deal with emergency, but the lack of a more structured plan led us to have a solution that would actually increase a problem that we already have, that is energy affordability. So we are not only creating a situation that is even worse for people who are already struggling to afford this, but we are also incentivizing illegal behavior, right? So, and the second example I would like to bring is also related to the international context. So, of course, with everything that's happening in the war, like fossil fuel are having very volatile prices right now, and with the rapid inflation. So this also affected Brazil, and the fossil fuel prices were really increasing there, and we were starting to have a lot of strikes in the country. And so one of the solutions was also to cut out all the taxes that the state receives from the fossil fuel as a way to immediately reduce these prices. But solving the problem by giving up all the revenues has very different, has very indirect impacts, like many layers of indirect impacts. And and people don't really understand how, no, it's okay. And people don't really understand how their immediate problem, like the people only can understand that their immediate problem was solved, but they don't see how this affects them in a bigger picture. So, like, just to finalize, I believe like one good thing that can come out for this is that we see that when the Congress understands that people are demanding this, and they really will do measures that they think otherwise they will be facing a political suicide. So this is also very important for us as think tanks, because like our roles, we can bring information to society. We can help them understand how these are affecting them. And yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Kajol?
Yeah, thanks. I think a couple of points are being covered on the different aspects of the just transition and their challenges and how we can move forward. So I would like to just elaborate on my previous point when I mentioned about, that the number of the workforce that are working in the fossil fuel and how they are not having, how differently they are dispersed in terms of where the generation is happening versus where the RE power jobs are available. Just to give the numbers around it, there are estimates that there are about 1.2 million people working in the coal field mines. So we are looking at a very huge number when we look at the overall transition. And this is where, the people, this is just the estimate which shows that these are the numbers in the coal mines. But when we include the informal people working in the manufacturing segment, in the industries segment, the informal numbers are going to be even huge. And when we include the female or the gender angle to it, this becomes even more, the challenges are multifold, and that adds another dimension to the challenges, and we must need to take into consideration when we look at the just transition. We have been speaking with a couple of the industries and the workers in India when we were trying to look at what are the challenges the industry workers will face and what are their understanding on the just transition and the energy transition. So while we have been speaking with some of these labor, one thing that we realized is there is a definite need to the access for the skilling and upskilling of these workers in these different industries. But some of them have been migrated to different states, and the local language becomes a challenge, that how the vocational courses be developed in those languages which they understand rather than the language where they are right now, versus the kind of the courses which will be available for the future. Because when we are looking at this energy transition, we are looking at, the understanding on the solar, understanding of different technologies, understanding of the, tomorrow if green hydrogen becomes one of the key fuel, then how the overall understanding for these different newer technology can also be put into the picture of the vocational trainings that are required in future, how important it is to bring different kind of course modules which are easily accessible. And the second point is, who is going to fund some of these vocational courses? Do we have funds enough? Because definitely the laborers who are working in these industries don't have the funds. We also need to find out who is going to finance the overall fair and equitable transition, and who is going to do these learnings and unlearnings of the people who are involved in these different segments. The another aspect which I see is very important while we look at the just transition is, the just transition is not just about the energy transition. It has to become the heart of the transition which is going to happen in future. It has to become in the center point, and the other aspects like whether it's energy, agri, transport, building, all needs to revolve around it. Because till now, whatever the transition has been happening, the people have been undergoing a lot of changes, but there was no safety net. And that now this is a time that we can enable and create that safety net with some of the, the work that we are trying to develop and the framework that we are planning to look at. So putting the people and putting the just transition in the center is something which is very essential that we need to do. And enabling a just transition by making the people to access towards the technology, making them as well aware about the right skills and the knowledge so that they understand how the emerging energy sector is going to behave. That's another very important aspect. And doing this, I understand that it requires a lot of support and challenges that we need to overcome by involving different stakeholders. So each stakeholder plays a very important role, being it the policy maker, the OEMs, or the technology suppliers, being the industries or the regulators, even the philanthropes. So collaborations are very critical. We need to unlearn a lot that we have been doing so far. We need nations at the subnational levels are likely to face a similar kind of a challenge. And these are the countries which could benefit by sharing the knowledge and the experiences in the just transition. So I'll stop here because I understand we are running out of time.
Thank you very much, Kajol. After the panel, we can also continue speaking outside. And Daniela, can we move to you in Argentina, please?
Yeah, sure. So for the sake of time, of course in Argentina we have diverse challenges associated to many of the ones that you were mentioning, such as macroeconomy dimensions related to poverty, need to pay back a huge debt to IMF, and politics. But I would like to focus on specific examples just to give you broad messages. So first of all, Argentina stopped the implementation of renewable energy integration to the grid. This is something we are very much concerned about because we have a mandate to integrate 20% of renewable sources to the electricity grids by 2020, and we are not going to commit it to make it. Moreover, we have the second biggest shale gas reservoir worldwide after the US, and the government is thinking it as a silver bullet to get the US dollars we need to pay back the debt. And plans are still strong to exploit the gas, and even though there are big measures and announcements about phasing out hydrocarbons, we aren't sure of how that's going to happen. And lastly, the third thing I wanted to mention is, in relation to that, is that the carbon tax that is designed in Argentina, it doesn't cover natural gas neither LPG or LNG. This is a major setback we are having, and the price of it is quite outdated. So in relation to those challenges, from Fundación Vida Silvestre Argentina, we are facilitating a multi-stakeholder group within a big worldwide alliance called the Alliance for Climate Action that exists in 12 countries already worldwide. And it's the way in which the Marrakech Partnership is being implemented, at least partly, because it's related to non-state actors and subnational governments. And we are facilitating that network within Argentina with around 50 members from companies, from NGOs, from the academy. Us together, we are working in two strands. One is related to policy advocacy, bringing solutions to these challenges collectively through policy briefs, through dialogues, and several other initiatives to improve policy making and participatory decision-making processes as well. And the second strand is related to action. So basically, we have major companies within the alliance, and we are triggering renewable energy integration in the supply chains of big companies such as the biggest maltery in the country. So it's not only about advocating, but also about climate action per se, and how companies, private sector mainly, can actually put in practice their responsibility in approaching the climate crisis we are facing. So yeah, just that from my side. I hope I was in time, and of course I'm open to questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Daniela. For the purpose of not taking time from the next session, I would like to propose that we take questions and answers outside. But maybe like one sentence summary, like sum of all the sessions, I would say of our message as like Enertrex alumni would be: there is no one-size-fits-all approach to just transition, and all the challenges, like advantages, disadvantages, and way forward, like how to come through this like barrier and challenges, are very country-specific, although there are like many commonalities as well. So we have 2 minutes left, so I would like to very fastly ask our panelists, like, what will be the 2 keywords that you would take away from this panel around just transition? So maybe Marina, we can start with you and go through.
2 keywords, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, let me see. I think like we need a plan, and this plan has to be, it has to be for the future, but also for the present.
People first. This is the first transition in history that's not only motivated by efficiency. We're not moving from horse carriage to motorized vehicle. There is a purpose for this transition, and this purpose should put people in the middle.
Yeah, I think, So 2 words that I would probably propose is, first is a safety net that we definitely need. And second would be a right definition and a framework for just transition. And it has to be fair and equitable transition.
Just to add, I'm the last one, so it's most difficult. Not lose the optimism, but stay pragmatic, maybe.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, panelists, thank you for audience for being with us this morning. And maybe I would like to pass the floor to Marta.
Yes, so thank you very much. The time has run out. We have no time for questions. I do want to say that if you have anything that you want to address our panelists with, please come approach us after this session. There will be a bit of time for the next session to set up, and we will stay a moment here. So if there's any questions, any comments or reactions that you'd like to raise to us and the Enertrax alumni, you can approach us after the session. And with that, I really just want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Enertrax alumni that participated in this session, also to the Enertrax alumni that are in the audience today supporting behind the scenes. Also to my colleague Lydia from Agora Energy Transition, who is in the background there. And not least also to the PCCB team that have made this day a possibility, that have selected this event to open the Just Transition and Sustainable Economies Day. If you're more interested in knowing anything about the Enertrax Alumni Network or the Enertrax training programs that we implement with Agora Energy Transition and Renewables Academy, feel free to access our website agora-energiewende.de. We can't have the slide up, there's some technical difficulties going on. Hopefully the audience that joined virtually has been able to follow along this session, and with that we just remain to say thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance and your attention, and hopefully you have a great rest of the day here in this capacity building hub as well as at COP27. Thank you and goodbye.